Well, folks, we have an update on the Russian space nukes story from last week. Vladimir Putin himself has now responded to the allegations made anonymously that were supposedly leaked to the American media last week, drip-fed, one word at a time. Um, I mean, it was quite remarkable to watch in real time the way in which they leaked that. Anyway, Putin is saying, as you would expect, that this is a complete fabrication. It is a total lie, and that Russia is a firm defender of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, uh, which states clearly that no nation who signs on to the treaty may deploy nuclear weapons in space. It is something that the United States and the Soviet Union were able to agree on way back in 1967, the height of the Cold War. This is in the wake of the JFK assassination, which many people at the time still believed that the Soviets had something to do with. The official story, I mean, even says that it was a communist who took down JFK, even way back then. The U.S. and the Soviet Union were able to agree, okay, we're not going to put nukes in space. That would be crazy. But the American regime in 2024 wants us to believe that Vladimir Putin is about to deploy nuclear weapons in space. I don't know. Does that seem reasonable to you folks? Do you think Putin is really crazier than Khrushchev, who banged his shoe on the table and told Richard Nixon that we will bury you? Do you think he's crazier than Khrushchev? Do you think he's crazier than Brezhnev, who was a general, I believe? He was a military dictator. You would think that the Soviet Union was going to have a warlike leader. It would be the guy who was from the military. He was not a politician. He was a career military guy. You would think that would be the guy, the Russian leader, who was going to put nukes in space, right? Nope. Apparently, it's Vladimir Putin. We're told to believe, even though Putin's been around for since what, 1999, something like that, maybe 2000. No, I think 99. Yeah, so over 20 years, and 25 years maybe. And he just now, Putin's, he's gotten the urge. He said, why don't we put nukes in space? Remember that stupid outer space treaty thing? Who cares about that? Let's put nukes in space, because that won't start a global arms race to put nukes into space. Putin, Putin, he's Mr. Escalation. He's always pushing the buttons when it comes to the nuclear threat, right? He's always trying to push and deploy nuclear weapons closer and closer to America's borders. He's always building new bases for Russia closer and closer to America, putting them in countries sometimes right on America's doorstep. Maybe not directly in Canada, but somewhere around there, right? Isn't there tons of Russian bases and things and Russian nuclear weapons spread all around the world? Oh wait, no, it's not the case at all. The pattern of behavior that we have seen out of the Russians would not suggest, to me, just being a reasonable person, I would not think that Russia is anywhere close to deploying nuclear weapons in space. That sounds bizarre and absurd. If Russia was going to suddenly start becoming much more aggressive towards the United States, because remember, stuff to do with Ukraine, that is not aggression towards America. Even if you want to argue it's aggression towards Ukraine, because America doesn't own Ukraine. And I think that any Russian in any time in history would take offense at the idea that Ukraine, a country that borders Russia and at various times in history has been a part of Russia, is somehow American property, and so therefore by trampling on Ukraine, you're trampling on America. I think that that's not a reasonable position to take. So anyway, you can argue Russia not friendly with Ukraine, okay? I think that's a fair point. But Russia has not done much of anything. They haven't done jack diddly squat to threaten America. I mean, you haven't even seen the Russians be very aggressive with American invaders inside of Syria. which Syria is a Russian ally, has been a Russian ally for decades and decades. And America invaded Syria when Russian troops were already present. So Russia was invited into Syria by the Syrian government to put down an uprising. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean, you're allowed to have your opinion and support the CIA rebels. That's perfectly fine. That is an entirely separate matter. But the fact of the matter is that Russia entered Syria with the express permission and at the request of the Syrian government, the established government. And then the United States invaded Syria, Russia's ally, and went to war against that government to steal their oil. And I have not seen Russia do anything to directly inhibit America's ability to steal oil from one of Russia's closest allies. I mean, they're basically doing it right in front of Russian troops, and the Russians have not stepped in to stop them. So, the way I see it, the Russians have bent over backwards to try and avoid any sort of conflict with the United States, even if the United States seems to be interested in starting some kind of conflict with Russia, because Russia, I think, logically has come to the conclusion that there is no scenario in which we have some sort of armed confrontation with the United States that ends well for us. It wouldn't end well for the United States either, of course, but it wouldn't end well for Russia, certainly. Because nuclear powers cannot just go to war with each other. That can't happen, because that ends in the apocalypse. The Russians still believe in mutually assured destruction. I don't think the Americans do. The Americans just think that, and I mean the Americans in Washington, they think that mutually assured destruction doesn't apply anymore since 1991. They think that they can just do whatever they want, and I guess Russia just has to sit down and take it. When certainly the opposite would not be true. If Russia went to war with us, hell yeah, the United States would turn Siberia into a sheet of glass. And yes, maybe 80% of the world's population would starve during nuclear winter. But that's why it's important. That's why it is imperative, essential for the continued existence of the human race to make sure that the United States and Russia never go to war. And so that is why I would be beyond shocked if Russia violated the 1967 Outer Space Treaty by sending nuclear weapons into space. Because by violating a nuclear treaty with the United States, it's not a direct declaration of war against the United States, but it's getting there. It's certainly getting there. Obviously, if that treaty was broken, well, then the United States would do the same. The United States would send nuclear weapons into space, and then everyone would have space lasers pointed at each other. And nobody wants that. The best case scenario would be the nukes would shoot at each other in space and blow each other up, and then you would just have nuclear bombs detonating, in outer space, raining down radiation on the planet. But nevertheless, the United States is again doubling down on this report. Again, through anonymous sources in the media. So that's all I have to say about that. I think that what I said last week is obviously true. This is about getting that very unpopular, no good, very bad Ukraine war funding bill passed. It is clearly just trying to say to members of the House, well, if you don't vote for this to send more money to Ukraine, then that means you support Russian space nukes. And then they're even using the friggin' Navalny thing to say the same thing. Al Franken, blast from the past, I saw on Twitter, is talking about how, if the Republicans won't vote to send more money to Ukraine after this Navalny killing, how do we say that the Republicans are anything but evil? Am I right? I mean, I'm told that Al Franken was once upon a time a comedian, but it must not have been during my lifetime, because I've never seen the guy show any sense of humor. He's always so dry and boring and unappealing. Oh, and remember when they ran him out of the Senate because he got Me Too'd? That was funny. I remember right before that, Jake Tapper doing some slobbering interview with Al Franken talking about how, like, oh my God, Al, you're so smart, you're so charming. Why don't you run for president in 2020? Because they had this idea that, like, Al Franken, is some big brash, alpha male who could take on Trump. I mean, it's hilarious. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here in the next one.